Hi, so hello and welcome to Writing While Black, an interview with Black authors. I want to take the time to thank you all for attending this virtual program with talented Black authors from across the country, ready to speak on their experiences, not only in the publishing industry, but to tell their stories about growing to be writers and how their life experiences as people of color may have shaped, guided, or influenced their path. My name is Eboni A. Harris, and I'm a librarian too with San Jose Public Library in San Jose, California. In commemoration of the 100th year of celebrating Black history in the United States, San Jose Public Library has created a menu of high-quality programming free to all to honor the contributions of Black Americans to this country and the world. Black History Month, originally called Negro History Week, was founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in February of 1926 and is a month-long celebration to promote, research, preserve, interpret, and disseminate information about Black life, history, and culture to the global community. Writing While Black is part of a homegrown documentary series called Working While Black, where we spotlight different career fields that are typically thought to be dominated by races other than Black. Where there is professionalism, there will always be Blackness, but our stories are often suppressed or underrepresented in spaces outside of our own. So we use opportunities such as Black History Month, which puts a spotlight on Black achievements, as platforms to share, connect, and grow. And today I have the pleasure of introducing to you authors Alessandra Harris, Christine Butler Taylor, Erica Martin, Jeff Carroll, Lakeisha Jackson, and Keisha McIntyre, speaking to you from California, Missouri, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, and Indiana. I want to personally thank you all for volunteering your time to brighten our days. This panel will consist of an interview session between myself and the authors, and then the floor will be open to questions from the audience and for the authors to ask questions of each other in about the last 10-15 minutes of our time. During the panel interview session, I do ask for audience mics to remain muted. Please type comments or questions you might have into the chat for us to view. This session, as I said earlier, it will be recorded to later be uploaded to San Jose Public Library's social media channel. So audience members, you may choose to turn your cameras off at this point. Okay, so thank you all for listening to my spiel, but I know what you're really waiting for. So now I'm going to pass the mic over to the authors and begin with our first question. So authors, please introduce yourselves. Go ahead and tell us your name. And if you use a pen name, let us know what it is so we can look you up later. And tell us where you're from, what genres you write, and how long you've been active in the industry.
I'll go. My name's Keisha McIntyre. I publish under KRS McIntyre, no relation to the musician. I'm from Indianapolis, and I'm a fan of speculative fiction. I enjoy writing books for younger readers, like teen readers, middle grade, and even new adult books. The majority of my stories are like young adult books or young adult friendly. I published my first book, Saving Eden, in January of 2020. So I guess I've been publishing for 6 years now. So excited to be here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, I'll go. Hi, I'm Christine Taylor-Butler. I'm originally from Ohio, but I've been living in Kansas City for close to 40 years. So my first book was published in 2003. And so I'm a recovering MIT engineer who now writes full-time for children. That's it.
My name is Erica Martin. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, and I write nonfiction and poetry for Kidlit, young adult mostly, and I have a picture book coming out later this fall, but I published my first poetry collection, And We Rise, nonfiction for the civil rights movement in 2020 as well. So I've been writing for a long time, but publishing professionally for 6 years now.
Okay, I can go. I'm Lakeisha Jackson. I write under the pen name R.L. Jackson. I am a contemporary romance author from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, but moved to Georgia. I'm also a filmmaker, and I've been published since 2017. And that's it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alessandra Harris. I'm in Santa Clara County. We're going to be hosting the Super Bowl tomorrow. And I'm originally from here. I have written mainly in the mystery, suspense, and thriller genre. Although I have 3 novels that falls within that genre and then 1 nonfiction title. My first novel came out in 2016, so I have been in this industry for about 10 years now.
Thank you for those introductions. And now that we've gotten that out of the way and everybody knows who they're talking to, let's get into it. So the first question I really want to ask you is, how do you feel about writing while Black and how that affects the stories you choose to tell and the way you tell them?
Oh, snap.
That Jeff?
Yeah, I didn't get to introduce myself. Oh, my
Oh,
God.
Jeff, I didn't know that was you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We have one more out there. Go ahead.
My name is Jeff Carroll. I've been writing since 2003, and I write mostly science fiction and horror books, as well as being a novelist. I write movies, and mostly now I'm doing comic books.
Hey, thank you, Jeff. So sorry about that.
No problem.
All right. So now we do have all our introductions. Let's move on to our next question. We all want to know, how do you feel writing while Black affects the stories you choose to tell and the way you tell them?
Well, I'll start because I've been doing this a really long time. I have 2 girls, and I grew up as a reader because we didn't have a lot of money. And when I was growing up, libraries were free, but you had to translate. If you wanted to read science fiction or if you wanted mysteries, you had to translate because the stories were not written showing a lot of adults that look like us, but also showing kids that look like me. So as I as it would work out, the writing is not a real career, so I got encouraged to discover engineering. But as I had my own children, I was interviewing for my college at night, and I realized how many kids that look like my kids were struggling, even at the 12th grade, not at the right level, not exposed to things. And so that was the problem I wanted to fix. It was great. Publishers in the children's market 23, 25 years ago wanted Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. They didn't want kids who could do super cool things or experiments. And so I thought it was really important not only for kids that look like my kids to see stories in which they were participating in things not having to do with oppression, but also people who did not look like my kids, see us doing the same things. You know, if you want a bike, it's because you want a bike. It's not because you're Black.
Let me take a step back to answer. I started writing in my 30s for myself in my teens. And I say that because I didn't find myself in the stories that I like to write, like science fiction, and thus they weren't interesting to me, and I didn't read them. And I didn't read drama because I didn't like drama. So in my personal life, I avoided it. I avoided fights. I avoided bad relationships. I didn't like to hear those stories. So it's not necessarily that I write stories in retaliation for that, but I write stories answering some of the same science fiction questions from my perspective. So science fiction is a big what if. So I answer those same questions, but I just use people of color as my canvas, and that's where I get my inspiration from. Same place other science fiction writers get it from.
I guess I'll go. I kind of agree with what the other 2 authors have kind of said. Growing up, I feel like there were not very many like Black characters in the genres that I like to read. Like I've always loved dystopian books. I've always loved fantasy books, but like stories like The Hunger Games or Harry Potter didn't really like center characters that looked like me. So when it came time to publish my first book, I was thinking about like my future children and wanting them to have representation. And like the main character of the first book I published is like a Black biracial girl who was estranged from her mother, her Black mother. And one of the reasons she runs off into like this post-apocalyptic world is like she wants to learn the truth about her mother and about herself and her past. And then like my most recent book, my main character is like a Black and neurodivergent girl. So I feel like I try to include like aspects of identity in stories that I write. So yeah.
For me, writing while Black means knowing you either can tell the truth or you can be paid well, but you can't do both. Because in my experience, I have been writing with intent to publish since 2009. I graduated high school in 2010, and I knew in 2009 that I wanted to either become an author or a literary agent, and now I'm both. But I had been writing for all those years. I had produced several novels, and it wasn't until 2020 when George Floyd happened, the situation happened, and the country hit the fan, and stuff hit the fan, that the publisher was like, "Oh, you have Black work. Okay, let's see it." So like all of my books that had previously were, nice stories about nice Black joy, went ignored. And then I was like, oh, well, here's some Black history. Let's publish it and let's capitalize on it. So I got paid well. And even during the editing process, they were trying to tell me to, I wouldn't say tone it down, but it was a filter over it. The white editors, they meant well, like subconsciously, but due to their natural biases and conditioning, they were already trying to tell me, maybe we should do it like this. And it's a poetry collection of the civil rights movement, step by step. I didn't censor it at all, but I wouldn't say a fight, but more like a power struggle with the editors on how honest I wanted to be. A lot of civil rights books that are published for children are, and we all had kumbaya and everything was happily ever after. And I'm like, I can't do that. So either you can, writing while Black means even all the Black books, if you look at traditionally published books, they have a little censor to them, like you're publishing for the white eye more than for Black people. So that's very frustrating that I have to self-censor, knowing I can get paid well if I do it this way, but I can't be fully honest. So that's something I always think about when I'm writing up new work. Do I want to get paid well, or do I want to sit here and be broke, That
reminds me of a movie that I still haven't seen. I really want to see it, but American Fiction. That's on my list of things I need to watch. I just can't find it. I can't find anywhere to watch it, but it's about that topic.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that when I was in high school reading the literature that we were assigned, I didn't see myself represented at all in that literature. But when I got older and graduated and was reading for leisure, I started reading like B.B. Moore Campbell and Eric Jerome Dickey, and seeing Black characters just living their lives, like realistically, but having real struggles. And that inspired me to start writing my stories, because I've written about situations that can be very realistic for me, for other people, and I think the authenticity will shows through the words on the page. Just that for me, I'm really excited to be in a panel with so many people who do like science fiction and fantasy, because I'm always admire people who have imaginations like that. But for me, I do tend to be more towards the realistic, real life issues. And for my fourth book, that's nonfiction, it probably is similar in some respects to Erica Martin, because it was a reflection of the times. had the idea in 2020 and ended up publishing it in 2024. But I think a reflection of the times of what it's like to be an African American in the United States and the struggles that we've had, and also the ways that we have overcome those struggles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the points I made to a publisher, because children's publishing is I said, it's a little bit like Hunger Games meets Lord of the Flies. And people have their ideas about what a Black voice is. That's why American fiction is so wonderful. It's because it audaciously addresses that. And I said, I grew up in Ohio, but I went to high school and college in the Boston area. And I have a cousin who grew up in, or two or three cousins who grew up in Compton, California. And I said, we're all Black, and I can tell when we're talking. I have cousins that are still in Ohio. I said, but our experiences are not exactly the same. So there might be, it's like even the word pop is different depending on what part of the country you go to. So I said, part of us writing while Black is talking about a wide range of experiences that in some cases publishers and maybe the general public is not completely aware of. So when I wrote my sci-fi novel, I had people saying, wow, this is really good, but where are the single parents and where are the, and it's easier now, but it was a couple decades ago, it's really hard.
Can I add one other aspect of science fiction writing? One of the things that comic books and movies are really plagued with a few years ago was race swapping characters, because they couldn't really think of a new Superman. So they wanted to be like, all right, let's put Samuel Jackson in there, let's give him Michael B. Jordan, and that is going to solve it. It's now an instantly Black story. I think we blame Will Smith for doing that with Independence Day. But Black speculative fiction is more than just Black faces. It's more than just the aesthetics. And I wanted to get beyond the aesthetics and get into the Black thought. And I deliberately try to write what I think Black culture's answer or reaction to certain things are. So like I do Black aliens, but my Black aliens, I want to know if you can have a Dogon people chart Sirius B without a telescope, then why would they need a metal machine to travel through space?
Right.
If Black people didn't travel around Earth conquering, death-destroying cultures, why would they assume intergalactic space travelers would do that here on Earth? So it's not about having friendly aliens, it's about having African authentic aliens and African authentic, Black authentic thought to some of these different characteristics. So yeah, I look at my post-apocalyptic story as not utopian, right? But I don't see us descending into cannibals and barbarians because we didn't come from cannibals and barbarians. Now, other people have a Game of Thrones origin and caves in their culture, so it's okay for them to write that we will degenerate into those things, but not every culture does. So that's my mission, is to write what I feel is authentic Black thought into my speculative answers to the big science fiction what if questions.
Well said.
Very well said.
I tried to do that without an editor.
You all have me scrambling to update these questions I have planned. Like, oh gosh, they're answering them all in that one. So here's the next question I have for you all. And it is inspired by what you all have said about Black literature and Black culture not being a monolith. All of our experiences are very different, but the publishing industry seems to still try to place Black literature in a box. And I want to know, are there any common are particular themes or stereotypes or character types or things that you feel people may want you to include in your fiction, or you've ever felt pressure to include, or that you have a obligation to write about certain things? And can you elaborate on this experience?
Absolutely. So I feel like in a lot of kid lit, they want to cater to the white liberal audience or the white audience. So it can be a feel good story about how the white person in the book learned a lesson, or we're teaching even through subtext, this is racism is bad. This is how it affects us. And I know a lot of authors of color, particularly Black authors, feel pressure to include that anyway, because, hey, look, this is our one chance to say something. Publishing is listening. Publishing has us, we have their attention right now. So let me put that in here to make sure people get it. So it's a push and pull on both ends. The publishers want to appeal to their, white audience. Oh, the white character learned a lesson, and it's in a lot of kid lit. If you really stop and analyze a lot of Black leads, there's always a white side character who's either the bad guy or who's extra woke, and you got to throw the extra woke white person into the story. And I feel like Black authors do that because they wouldn't be published otherwise. Like y'all were saying, publishing only has one view of what Black literature is or should be, and if it's anything other than that, you can't get published. And I'm not gonna spill tea, but the Black authors who did try to deviate from that path, there were a lot of internal editor power struggles. Let's just put it that way. It was a hot mess. So the Black authors who did try, it's not like we didn't try. I say we, but I saw it happening before I stepped into the industry and was warned about it. And then I saw it happening and I was like, oh my gosh, this is for real. So yeah, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that Black authors try to overcome, but ultimately, they'll throw in the Black editor in the mid tier or at the bottom, but it's the white editors and the PR team and the marketing who have the final say so. So if you actually analyze what's been published in Black kid lit for the last 6 years, you'll see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are also
I've even heard authors talk about that. There's authors that I follow on social media. One of them is a YA author who wrote, I don't know if a really popular book that's used in schools all the time. My husband's a teacher. I know they've even read this book in their school. But on Instagram, she was talking about how the first books that she tried to write and tried to get published were speculative fiction, fantasy, more escapism type stories. But the story that got published that was able to launch her career and get a movie deal and all this stuff was a book that's specifically about race. Mm-hmm. And I feel like just because you're a Black author, not obviously your race and your viewpoints and your worldview is going to be different than because everyone has their own worldview that's partially influenced by their background. But I don't think that every story has to be specifically about the topic of race in order for it to have value for readers. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting how it was so much easier for her to get that book published than writing her original stuff. And now she's saying, oh, I'm gonna go back and publish the fantasy now. So now she's able to do that. Because she did that first. So, yeah.
I know in comic books, there is, first of all, Black people are not monolithic. Let me just say that, okay? And why do I say that is because my generation, and I'm in the 80s, I was in high school in the 80s, we had a different type of hip hop music, right? We had KRS-One, we had Public Enemy, we had even the Heels of Zulu Nation. It was very positive. And we had that energy. It was before the 90s came out with the bling bling stuff. And now we're in a era of, I don't want to hear any more slave narratives. I don't want to hear any more Black trauma. And it's very hard to tap dance around that and to do a story that has roots, right? You know, because you want to go back and write a story that takes place and has a motive in something really gripping. But many times we go back past the 60s, our biggest threat was segregation. Our biggest threat was racism, you know, and it's very hard to find a narrative outside of that. You can go back 400 years. That's our biggest thing that we dealt with, you know, for a few hundred years, and it's just very hard to go around that. And I see a lot of Black illustrators or Black comic book creators, writers in general, writing characters that do look artificially multicultural. And they're not, there's no editor involved. These are straight writers, creators themselves, and they avoid the racial issue. And I think a lot of it is because they don't know how to deal with it. They don't think that their book will sell if they do address it. And for me, I take that sacrifice. I take that L, you know. I feel that, you know, it's authentic. You know, I wrote a movie called Gold Digger Killer, which was authentic to my personal experience of dating, right? And from there, I just was like, well, that's a Black issue. I'm going to see if white people get into it. And they get into it just like they get into Too Short and many of these other more grimy rappers, right? And that's it. You know, nobody's going to appeal to everybody. So no matter what, there's going to be some people that don't like whatever you do. And that's the way I address it.
Can I tell you, when George Floyd died, I just about lost my mind. And part of that was not only because of the injustice, but all of a sudden my social media feeds was filling up with teachers and librarians saying, what are the best books on how to be anti-racist? And my husband's very Zen, and I'm very type A, and he says, don't respond. And I was just, you know, and I finally got really angry. And so on Twitter, I said, you know, you need to hear me. I'm a mother and I'm a children's author and I'm a former, you know, engineer, still an engineer. And I said, kids who are facing trauma don't want to be bombarded with books about trauma. You know, they're trying to process stuff. I said, but I get the point. And I've told my publishers I will not write those books. There are people who do it better. I said, so here's the deal. They need to see themselves doing things that are not always based on what happened in the past. Because we, you know, when I got in the business, there were next to none of those. I said, but people outside also need to see them. They're not in Harry Potter's inner circle. They're not in the Hunger Games unless they're going to die. And I said, so for every book on racism you provide a child, you must provide 20 books that are pure joy. Because when my girls want to date, it's because they want to date. It's not because they're Black and they want to date. That tweet got 500,000 views in the first week, 2,500 retweets. I ended up in the New York Times and on CBS Boston local affiliate, even though I live in Missouri. And I had teachers saying, thank you for giving me something different to do. And I said, well, every February we do Black Oppression Month. So if you want to see all of those books, that's what publishers are happy to give you. But I did an experiment with a book in which none of the characters are white, not a single one of them. And I said, I want to see if people can tell. And Random House loved the book because they thought I was a white author and wanted to meet me. So I flew to a conference. The minute that editor met me from Random House, I knew the book was dead. You know, I told the agent, did she know I was Black? And she says, what difference does it make? I said, it makes every difference.
To her.
To her. So the person who published the book was Black. She was my editor at Scholastic. And we're looking at all this stuff that's going on. And I said, I need people to read this book like these kids are ordinary kids. So we tell you the race of every kid, except for the main character. And then a conservative white bookstore owner sends me a message and says, wait a minute, Penn is Black? And I said, well, is that a problem? Because he's in a very conservative part of Missouri. And he says, well, no, because it comes out on page 280. And by then, all of my readers, all of my customers are sucked into the mystery. They don't care. I said, that was the whole point, is that my character makes a comment that he will not go through a black hole first because the token black character always gets killed off in the movie. That's the first time I tell you. By then, nobody cares. And so I think there needs to be both. It's not one or the other. But the concern that I had is my kids need to fill out bank applications and mortgage applications and college things, and they need to code switch, I guess is what I'm saying. But I also have kids in schools that are near me who have no exposure to the fact that we have black astronauts. So that's part of why our reading needed to expand, and why we needed, at least I'm a children's author, we needed children's publishers to expand the way they think about us as characters and authors and illustrators.
And anybody else want to jump onto that question? Okay, so once again, go ahead.
Okay, I would definitely agree. Especially a white audience wants to see Black stories about the rags to riches, growing up in poverty and making your way out, or being in an impoverished setting and having to do what you need to do to survive, oftentimes leading to you dying at the end. The characters, I'm thinking of like a Boys in the Hood type of story. And I think that what a lot of us here are saying is that we are not a monolith, and there's so many other stories we can tell, and we can tell them in beautiful ways. And I know for myself, I'm living a middle-class life in Silicon Valley. So kind of like what Christine said, her cousins who live in Watts are going to live a very different life than I'm going to live. But their lives are just as important as my life. And as a writer, I want to showcase what reality looks like for me in a way that's going to be entertaining for people. So in my own voices experience, I've written from the perspective of Black author, but also from the perspective of someone who's struggled with mental health issues before, from a perspective of someone who's had people close who've been incarcerated and having to come out of incarceration and deal with putting their lives back together after that experience, which is common for a lot of African Americans instead. So particularly in my experience, what I love about being with a small press / mid-sized press is that they allow me to tell my stories the way I want to tell them without an editor at a Big Five press saying, no, that's not popular right now. So I absolutely like the space I'm in. I think, like Erica had said, if you're going after like the big bucks, a lot of times they do want you to conform in certain respects to really get those stories to be taken on by a big editor. But if you're an indie author, self-publishing with a smaller press, then I feel that oftentimes you do have more liberty and more freedom to write the stories that you want to tell.
Thank you. All right, did anybody else want to jump in before I move on to the next question? Hi, Celeste. Oh, that's a hand clap. Okay, so once again, you're making me deviate from my planned questions, but this is a revised one. But with the struggle we see that there is for Black people to tell narratives outside of what's been popularized or outside of the stories others think you should tell, and what publishers think will sell under the white gaze or the gaze of others who are not Black, are you starting to see more Black editors, Black publishers, and agents and other industry professionals who can assist with the publication process in greater quantities and higher places? And do you think that representation matters and is important, and why?
I'll start this one since I'm also a literary agent. Actually, the editors who bought my work as an author were white, and the black editors and the other editors of color tend to be on the lower side, so they don't have as much power or say so as the higher up white editors. So it is very noticeable, like to get it up the chain. And the editor who bought my work during the George Floyd protest, she was a senior editor, and she didn't have to get, you have your acquisitions meeting, which is essentially they take your work, and for those who don't know, they take your work and they gather all the editors, all the people in the publishing house, and they basically say, yes, we want this, or no, we don't want this. She was able to bypass that and preempt me, and we turned that down, and she was able to bypass that again and take me to auction. So she was pretty high up power. As far as my literary agent side, dealing with editors, I have not had that situation where I could have bypassed editors to be like that. So I have subbed to black editors. I have been subbed to black editors and other editors of color, and they just don't have the power to make it happen right away like they want to. And it's frustrating because it not only affects me as a black author. The first book I sold was by an Asian American, a Chinese Asian American. And you would think, since during 2020, there was also a lot of racism against Asians at the time, you would think people would be like, oh, she has a point to say. No, I tried, by then when I subbed her out in 2023, being a person of color wasn't in anymore. So, black work wasn't selling, Asian work wasn't selling. So it's very hard out there if the editors and the agents don't have real power. So you kind of have to, I wouldn't say censor yourself again, but you kind of have to be like, do I want this higher editor who might say yes, or do I want to sub to a black editor where she might understand me more and be more relatable, but she might not have the power to push it through acquisitions?
Right. The number is not increasing in children's publishing. It's just not. My very first editor was at Scholastic, and she started Cartwheel Books for them. And she said, you want to write for me? And I'm starting this new line. First book I ever wrote and sold 100,000 copies, and Scholastic yawned. She had a 24-book series. She was promised another, set after that. And then Scholastic changed their mind. She recommended me to a black author in another part. Scholastic is just enormous. In the magazine division, and that was the Read and Rise series. I even wrote their literacy guide along with stories for the magazines that were going out into the community for free. And then they promoted a white woman over her, so she quit. And said, I'm going to go to grad school. And then my third publisher said, why don't you write nonfiction for me? Which is one of the other things that I really push for black authors is, when you have to pay the light bill, you have to produce a lot of work. So I do a lot of nonfiction. And she was doing hundreds of books. And then it just got to be too hard. Because you don't get any support, and she quit. So I see people coming into the industry and doing amazing work and not getting treated well by the major publishers who are all about diversity, as long as that diversity is going through their white cohort. I'm at the age where I'm just going to be honest. It is hard to be a black author, but it is even harder to try to be a black editor.
Did anybody else want to add to that?
I'll say this. I have had good experiences and bad experiences with editors and black editors as well. And I think it is a business of money, just like other businesses are. So in music, we call it crossover, you call it mainstream, things like that exist. And I find a happy space in being called a genre writer, because that way I don't have to do well in the mainstream. I can top the genre charts, and those are a little bit more easy to navigate, or they're just a different machine. So my first published book was a horror book, and it got published by a horror company, a horror publishing company, a horror publishing imprint, and it wasn't that difficult. It was a white company as well. Then recently, I have had a story that has been rejected by numerous black editors, and I think it's mostly because so they can be stronger gatekeepers than the old-fashioned white gatekeepers were. And sometimes I feel like, the George Floyd energy skipped black editors, and the white editors are like, oh my God, let me get this story because black people or people need to hear it. You young black person that I would have overlooked before George Floyd, maybe now I'm going to look at you. And then the black editor is like, I don't know, it's too much for me. I'm not really going to try to deal with you that way. So I don't know, but I've found some success with black editors that do their own publishing imprints themselves and specialize in black books, not the black editors that work for white publishing companies or white magazines per se. I just see a difference in that.
Thank you. Okay, so my next question is going to seem a little redundant because everybody has spoken a bit about microaggressions that they've experienced in the publishing industry. But I would just like to know if you can tell us about any deeply significant microaggressions or challenges you've experienced writing while Black with not only editors or publishers, but perhaps even your readership or people that you may have met at conferences. And then can you balance it out with something heartwarming or positive that may have occurred because you write while Black? Like, were you able to help or educate or inspire someone?
I guess I can go about, so a while ago, I started like this little Facebook group called Diverse Books with Magic. And
What is it?
Called Diverse Books with Magic.
Okay.
When I first started writing, it was just a way for me to find other people who liked speculative fiction with diverse characters. And I was like, oh, well, we should like write an anthology together. So we made this anthology called Girls of Might and Magic. It's like a YA fantasy anthology. And like the majority of it was all good. But then like we got like some weird reviews. One of them was like, the person said, my detractor for this anthology, and this review is still on Amazon, by the way, my detractor for this anthology is that the authors make it a point to stress that the main characters are of colored backgrounds. Is this an agenda being pushed? And is it one that mainstream readers like to accept? And then I felt like, and then they kind of gave it a low like star rating, even though the majority of their review was positive except for that line. So I was like, is the only reason you don't like the book because the characters are not white people? And it's just kind of stuff like that, but I will say like doing that process, like it allowed me to connect with like a lot of other writers and things of that nature. And also we kind of kept going and published like a couple more anthologies. But usually my anthologies are like, I'm angry about someone. Like I remember I was upset because like people being upset about like diverse characters in fantasy when that like Little Mermaid movie came out. So I'm like, we should do an epic fantasy. No, it was some type of show. It wasn't The Little Mermaid, but I did like an epic fantasy anthology written by like diverse authors. So it's always really fun though, even though you sometimes get those comments like that. But the point is to find people to connect with and find other writers and just create something together that's enjoyable. So I think even though you sometimes get those like negative reactions, I still think overall it's always a positive experience. And you'd honestly be surprised. Like, even though there's like those negative people, there's people of all backgrounds who will support you as well. So I feel like, yeah, overall, it's a good experience. So.
I have an experience I can share. This is a little bit more overt than a microaggression, but my first novel, Blaming the Wind, follows two couples, one that's African American, one that's white. And one of the African American characters, her sister is actually half white, half black. So with my publisher, the way it works is we go through developmental edits first to look at the bigger issues of the story, and then pass it on to a line editor who will do like the commas and typos and all that kind of stuff. So the developmental edit went really well, and then my line editor hated my book. And one of the things she said was that the interracial couple was controversial, and she didn't know if that was going to be accepted by the audience. Mind you, this is 2015, and I don't know, like, Frederick Douglass married a white woman after his wife passed. This has been going on for centuries in our country. So for me, it was just kind of like I was stuck, because she did not like my characters. She did not feel like they were believable. She felt like the audience might be, or the readers might find offense to it. And I think in that moment, I really had to just believe in myself and believe in my story and say, this is a reality. I don't think it's controversial, but I think sometimes when you're in publishing, you're going to have to come up against editors, or other naysayers who might not like what you're writing exactly. But I would like to contrast that to the positivity and positive reviews I did get for my third novel, Last Place Scene, that follows, like I briefly mentioned, a couple where the husband had been incarcerated for 18 months, and then he comes out, and him and his wife are trying to put their lives back together, and then he becomes one of the main persons of interest in the kidnapping of a 10-year-old girl. And a lot of the reviews were saying that it really opened their eyes to the discrimination that African Americans or people who have been incarcerated face, and all the struggles and the laws and the restrictions that are put in their way in order to get really back on their feet. Because a lot of times we think, oh, someone does their time, they get out, and can they just, get back into life, and how hard that can really be as an experience. So just to have the positive feedback, over 700 reviews, with people just saying, thank you for giving me this perspective and opening my eyes to this reality. That made me feel like the book did reach the aim that I had for it.
Mm-hmm. I tell people, the internet was wonderful until the internet stopped being wonderful. And so there are a lot of microaggressions that go on even within ALA. I'm sorry. But one of the things I told people is, I'm writing this series about a Black boy who doesn't know his parents may not be who they say they are. And Native American commentator, asked to see the ARC, and I said, sure. And if you've got any comments, let me know. I'm half a mile from the Native American Center here in Kansas City. And it got trashed because, she convinced everybody that I was writing a negative book about Native American tribes. And I said, well, first off, Black people are tribal. And second off, I wanted to write a book in which this African American kid cannot get through this dilemma without enlisting kids on his cul-de-sac. So he gets all of the kids to help him get through this problem. And I said, let's make sure they're not white. I just want to see if anybody will notice. So one is Native American, and one is Guatemalan, and one is from Tibet. And they think like 13-year-olds. They're not perfect. And I started to notice how publishers and reviewers started to say, we're not going to review a book unless we get a sensitivity reader. And then that's when I, way back in 2015, called bullshit, called foul, in a major way. And I said, because I'm going to go back to the fact that, I have a cousin who grew up in Compton who is, he's an Emmy Award winning a guitar player, and he and I talk Black, but we talk differently because of where we were raised. And then I went to a New England boarding school, so I have that code switch. And I said, the problem that we have is we have people who want everyone to have a single voice. I said, I love watermelon and fried chicken. Don't write it in a book because it's become a racist subtext. But if it's true to the person, put it in. I think if you need a sensitivity reader, don't write those characters. Go out and do the research. But what I found was there were sensitivity readers who decided, wow, I can make money doing this. And so what we got was a lot of books that were destroyed in social media, and publishers pulling books off the shelf, or authors pulling their books back. If you pull your book back, you got to pay back the advance that you got. And so instead of saying, here's what's working, here's what's not working, we had a lot of anger. So, we can talk about microaggressions in publishing, but in some cases, the worst microaggressions were coming from other people of color, biting people of color, because whatever was in the book didn't fit their category of what being Black is. And I said, Black is a lot of things, it's a lot of things you might not have been exposed to. So
I see that a lot in reader groups. Like I see people like attack books that are published, like by even just like famous traditionally published book. They're like, this book isn't Black enough. I'm like, a Black person wrote the book. Like, what does it need to be? Like, not every Black person is the same. Not everyone is the same experience. So I don't know. Whenever I see stuff like that, I'm just like, I don't know.
Like, I think I'm Black.
Yeah.
All right. Did anybody else want to jump onto that question? Okay, so we have a little more time, and I did want to take the chance to turn the microphone towards the audience. And if you feel comfortable, you can unmute and ask your questions, but if not, you can type your questions into the chat and I'll read them out to the authors. We can take about 3-4 questions.
I have a question, Deborah.
Okay.
Okay, so I would like to hear what the authors have to say about what are some of your absolute joys that you have experienced on your writing and publishing journey?
Two quick ones. One, my first book was about a kid who wanted to jump rope and the girls won't practice with him. So he has to practice with his parents, and his parents have all the answers because I couldn't figure out how to double Dutch jump rope. And I was at a Lit Fest, and a teacher came by and bought a copy of the book because a kid in her class had read it, and he was in a blended family, and he always felt like the odd person out, and that was his favorite book, and I wouldn't let her buy it. And then the second was with all the tribes controversy, there was a librarian who was retiring, and she says, I want you to go to Twitter. And I was like, okay. And she uploaded a video of a 4th grader who had doubled his reading score in one semester reading the first 2 books of my series. And that was the whole reason why I gave up engineering to write for our kids, was so that they could hear language other than what was going on in their own neighborhoods.
I'll jump in. I write young adult comic books, not young adult children's books or young adult novels. And my other novels are adult science fiction, per se. So the people that I impact are contemporary adults. And how I monitor that impact is when somebody comes up to me and says, you know what? I didn't think of it that way until I read your book. That makes a whole lot of sense. Why are aliens white when the majority of the people on Earth are Black? Why don't we, or people of color on Earth, why don't we see a people of color outer space, and they like, and things click, or when I start talk to people, I have a pirate story, right? And I used to call it a pirate story, and I tell people it's a pirate story, but it's really about a story about Black people fighting the maritime war during slavery. So when I wrote a story, I found out about this Black pirate called Black Caesar. He died in Miami, but he had two ships, over 150 people on each ship, and they were made up of mostly escaped slaves or rescued people from other slave ships. So they were mostly people of color. He teams up with Blackbeard. Blackbeard has four ships, up to 250 people per ship. Now we're looking at over 1,000 people. They're not running around the Caribbean like Johnny Depp. They are leading a military war against slavery. And so when I started writing stories like that from a different perspective, people came up to me and be like, yo, that makes so much sense. Thank you. And that is like amazing, because I had no proof of that. I just started writing based on the little bits of history that I found, and I didn't want to write the biography of Black Caesar, but I wanted to have his story inspired. So that's what we call alternative history, and that's a subgenre of science fiction. And I love when I do stuff like that, So that's my beautiful moment.
Hi,
I think-
Deborah. Sorry. Thanks for your question. I just want to say really quickly so everyone has a chance to respond. The joys are getting the book for the first time in your hands. And the second joy is getting a check for your book for the first time.
Yes. I agree. Like, for me, it's just doing stuff that I wouldn't have ever thought, like, my little writing stories would lead me to. I wrote the first draft of the first book I published, Saving Eden. I wrote the first draft in high school, and I found it as an adult, and I was like, oh, this doesn't suck as much as all the other random stuff I wrote in high school. So I kind of edited it and like fixed it up, and like the whole ending of the book is different. But like the fact that that little story I wrote as a teenager has been in bookstores, has been in libraries, have gone to conferences with me, has like over like 150 reviews on Amazon. Like, it's just kind of crazy. Just a little story that I wrote as a teenager has gotten into people's hands and actually like exists in the world. And like when you look on Amazon, you can see like the countries like that the book has been sold in. And you're like, oh, this book has been sold in countries from around the world. And it's just a little crazy when you think of it in that way. But I would also say just another thing that I really enjoy that's been highlights for me is like getting to participate in like community. I got to go to this book festival that's really cool called Imaginarium Book Festival. And it's a book festival specifically about fantasy and sci-fi. And it's organized by two Black women. They launched this book festival in Washington, D.C. So I got to do that like a couple years ago. I was on a panel for like a shared world project that I was in with a bunch of other authors called The Elders Trials. And like just the community there, the energy there. Those are some of the things that I would say would be highlights. Just being like, oh, I never thought I'd be in DC with my little book that I wrote in high school. So, yeah.
The joys for me is I do a lot of political and activist work outside of being an author, and I've been doing that for at least 12 years now. And with the book banning going on, one of the joys for me is how can I get this information out to the people who need it most, aka children, and get it out in a specific, concise, but simple manner. And for me, that was my first book, my poetry collection about the civil rights movement, where there's a lot of hidden and censored history that was whitewashed at one point that I put in here. So I don't know if a lot of people know, but it's very hard to self-publish kid lit because distribution to schools and libraries is vital to the life source of that book. So one of the joys for me is knowing maybe it's not in a textbook, but it's in my book, and I want to get, and it's in the other books. So that little loophole, it gives me joy because yeah, you can censor it from a textbook, but you can't censor us authors all the time. Even with the book banning, the books will find the way.
I could talk all day about how hard it is to self-publish YA and kid lit and middle grade. So I won't. But yeah, I definitely agree.
I'll jump in. I'm sorry, my computer's acting up, so the camera hasn't been working this whole time, so I apologize. But for me, I'm a self-published author, so for me, when the days of, maybe sales are going slowly and I'm not sure what position I should take next, if I should even write the next series or the next book, is when you receive like random reviews about how, for me, how my book either gave somebody that escape emotionally to go to another world, and it just reinforced to me that I didn't waste my time, that I should keep pushing and should keep writing and putting the stories out there. And I try to strive for that with the films that I do as well, because they all kind of interconnect. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. Okay, so we're on a little press for time, but I'm gonna make sure that everybody I acknowledge with a question has their question answered. So from Karen DJ, Karen asks, was there anything super surprising, good or bad, that caught you off guard?
I could chime in again. Being a self-published author, what I found surprising, which I think you guys did mention earlier on the publishing side, is the lack of representation when it comes to conferences. Black authors, even on the indie side, they don't get as many invitations to conferences. And then the 1 or 2 token ones that do happen to get to these big conferences, they don't typically reach down or reach across the aisle to help other authors. Is something that was kind of disappointing and surprising to see. And it's still happening, at least from my experience.
I had a good thing happen. I discovered that there were sci-fi conferences because of a local group in Kansas City, which is now my extended family. And one woman had flown in. She comes every year, and she says, you should come to Montreal for a conference. And, I'm looking at my visa and, my bank account and going, this is going to be a little bit. But I went and didn't know what to expect and was very openly accepted. And when I got back, she says, yep, I got good feedback. We would like you to be Toastmaster for World Fantasy in Montreal. And so what I have discovered is, while there is a lot of dysfunction in publishing, the sci-fi conferences I have found to be really accepting. And what a lot of hosts would do is put me on panels with really famous people, so it would also draw an audience I might not have drawn on my own. And maybe not everyone has had that experience, but I'm now on the board of directors for Science Fiction Writers Association. I'm the only African American person on the board, because I'm trying to say, we need to make sure this space is big enough for all of us, which is not always true. But I would encourage people to look at world fantasy and world sci-fi as a group that's been more open.
I would say something that's surprising to me would be how genre specific, like especially in self-publishing, like things can be. I feel like, just bouncing off of what someone else said about like the kid lit, I do feel like it's a lot harder if you're self-published or published by a small press to share kid lit than it is to share like books by adult readers. And there are actually like a lot more conferences and things like that I see that people can get into if you're an independent author or if you're with a small press, that will share adult literature from independent authors. The majority of them will. But I don't see that for YA or Kid Lit. Like there's whole conferences about young adult literature. And I feel like it's really difficult to be able to break into that unless you're traditionally published. Because I've even reached out and was like, hey, do you guys have opportunities for indie authors or anything like that? And just never get responses for the young adult specific conferences or things like that. So I definitely feel like that was kind of surprising. I know I went to this event that was local where this author was talking about like how he built his career and things of that nature. And then after the event, I reached out to him. I was like, hey, this is what I've been doing. Cause I was like doing a lot of the stuff that he was mentioning. And then I was like, do you have any suggestions for me? And he was just like, stop writing books for children. And I was just like, okay. So, yeah, I definitely felt like that was one thing that surprised me, like how genre specific things can be. And, yeah, it's just something to figure out, I guess. So, yeah.
I think one of the aha moments for me, and so many of them are happening, small, but they're like big to me, is how new to sci-fi people are. Like in the Black sci-fi world, we almost have a thing called before Black Panther and then after Black Panther. And I know, we were talking about before George Floyd and after George Floyd, but in terms of the readership, Black people got turned on to sci-fi after Black Panther in a way that they weren't prior. I mean, we've always had Octavia Butler, we had L.A. Banks, we had Stephen Barnes, but to have the energy that came from the movie Black Panther allow us to really take off, it's so much. And then the other thing that is a eye opener for me is still how many genres we haven't tapped into. I talked about the pirate, but I just came out with a comic book in October called Spoof Streets. And Spoof Streets is the first Black humor comic book with short stories like Mad Magazine. Now, we may have had humoristic characters and humoristic comic book characters, where the superhero was silly, but I'm spoofing flat earthers, I'm spoofing Medea, I'm spoofing other things that are in pop culture in ways like Mad Magazine, but we never had that before. And it was surprising to me because I just intended to make a comic book that was humoristic, but I didn't know it had never been done before. And to me, I'm like, wow, I'm thinking, we have done so many different things. There's so many of us doing it that everything has been done before, but everything hasn't. And there's still more things that haven't been done yet.
Okay. The next question goes to LaRonda.
Yes. This is an amazing panel. Ebony, San Jose Library, thank you for this. This is amazing. So my question, because all my other questions have been answered, you guys are great. For the indie authors, what has worked for you in terms of getting your work into the hands of your audiences?
I'll follow up on what I said earlier. One of the best things I did last year was to buy a booth display and a banner that matched, because I am now a Comic-Con assassin. I feel like I can go in anywhere and make my money back in ways that I have never been able to do that before. You know how they say your second book helps your first book sell? Well, I'm up to like 10 books now, and they're all selling. I don't almost know which book will be my main seller when I'm hitting conventions in ways that I don't sell online, and the other one has been Kickstarter. But Kickstarter hasn't sustained it. It's a combination of going to conventions and doing my Kickstarters. So those are two things that help me help my independent titles, because I have some titles that are published mainstream with traditional publishers, both comic book and novel. So the ones that are independent, I'm almost making them comic convention exclusives.
I would say for me, I just try to do a little bit of everything and then see what works for me. I have an email newsletter that I send out like usually about once a month, that just has updates and things I'm doing and a little bit about my life. And I've been able to grow that to, it's not huge, but it's like 1,600 people. But then like, I honestly feel like collaboration and like in-person events for me like works a lot better than trying to sell stuff on the internet. If you're in person, it does take like more time though, because you have to like, if I work full time, and I have life stuff happening. So sometimes it's hard to actually be able to get out there and do that. But like going to festivals like that Imaginarium Book Festival, even local things like my local library has events like Meet an Author, Be an Author, where they have independent, like a lot, well, about half of them are independent authors, and you can come in and share your work with the community in Indianapolis. They get about 50 different authors. Lots of libraries around me do different things like that. Local bookstores, just reach out to a bookstore, be like, hey, can I put up a booth in your bookstore? And some of them will say yes. Also just collaboration with other authors, like being part of anthologies. I organized a few anthologies. I joined a whole bunch of anthologies, or like shared world projects and things of that nature. That way you're kind of like building off of each other's audiences, especially if you can connect with people writing similar stuff to you. My last one I did was called Once Upon a Realm, and I specifically did that one to find other authors writing diverse YA books. So there was about 5 of us, and we each did fairy tale retellings from different perspectives, and we all kind of promoted it together. So like promoting with other people, I think helps your reach a little bit, and then hopefully they'll go back and like follow up with your other stories, your other books, and your solo work. So yeah, those are some of the things that I've tried as an indie author. Yeah.
To piggyback on what Keisha was just saying, is something I do are book newsletter swaps. And there's one in particular that I do. They only do it every like 3 months. But the last one I did, I think I got maybe 10,000 downloads on book 1, and then that carried on to the other 2 books in my series. So if you could find a good newsletter swap like that, where you promote the first book for free, but then it'll help with read through and getting your other books read, and they'll pay for the other 2 if you set it up that way. And then I know Barnes and Noble used to allow you, if you were an author, to go in and set up a booth and do a signing. But of course, you have to do the legwork of word of mouth and social media and bring books. And that's another thing too. Always have your books on hand. Talk about it with everybody. I keep books in my trunk like it's 2002 and I'm selling DVDs at the corner store. So if you want a book, yeah, I'm going to have that for them so that people can get their hands on it.
Okay, I love all
Thank
those
you.
answers, but we're a little over time. I hope everybody's okay staying a couple more minutes, because I wanted to get in this last question by Stephen Sullivan, and then I want the authors to give us a ending nugget of wisdom. So Stephen asked, and this is to everybody, but he notes especially to Jeff and Christine, without necessarily endorsing them, do you have any favorite examples of Black representation in mainstream media?
Viola Davis. Love her, especially in the African Queen. Jeffrey White, who I love, and he's really good in everything. And If you have not seen Paradise with Sterling K. Brown, then just sign up for Hulu for 1 month and just binge watch the first season. But they do a lot of the things I talk about that we need to do more for kids, which is they do amazing things, but it's broad.
So I would suggest, I don't know who the writer is, but it was a book first and it became a series. I think it's a series on Hulu. And this is just me saying this like right now. But, and that is Washington Black. That was an amazing series, which it includes the privateers. They're not pirates, they're privateers. And then there's another one, I'm thinking it's Jingle Jangle, that was on Disney, or gosh, if I could go on my phone and Google it, I would be able to find it easy. But those are two that I definitely recommend, especially for children or people new to science fiction or speculative fiction and fantasy. They just throw you right into something other than what we are experiencing right now.
If it's not children specific, there's a really good one on Apple called Dark Matter. Apple has a lot of really good science fiction shows, but Dark Matter was one that like captivated me, and I like sat there for hours. So definitely check that one out.
I would say the Black Museum episode of Black Mirror. I felt like it was like really well done.
I gotta talk to Keisha.
It kind of like shared different aspects of like Black. Okay, yes, kind of about trauma, definitely about trauma, but it was just very well done. So, yeah.
Did anybody else want to add in? I hate to cut anybody off. Okay, so I thank you all for bearing with us. We are 7 minutes over, but I still want for our authors to be able to share closing nuggets of wisdom or encouragement, or just a statement or opinion, or follow up on anything that we said before we start to say our goodbyes.
I would love to encourage everyone who might be in the audience who is a writer and is trying to publish their first book or start their publishing career. I would just encourage them to not give up, because you're going to get a lot of no's in this industry, especially if you're trying to go the traditional route. With querying either an agent or small or a mid-sized to small press, you're going to get a lot of no's. But if you stay professional and if you continue to hone your craft and continue to improve as a writer, you're going to get to where you want to go.
I'll add that I second what she said. And also, as an author, you have to have thick skin. I would advise you to never, ever, ever read reviews on Goodreads or even Amazon sometimes, because not everything you write is going to be for everybody, but you don't want one negative review to get into your head and, make you feel like you're not good enough. So just keep your head down, write your stories, get them out into the world, because who it's meant for will find it and will appreciate your work.
Yeah, I'm going to say ditto to don't give up. I've been doing this a long time, so I have published probably about 100 books. But one of my favorite books, it was been sitting in my drawer for 15 years because it couldn't find a home. And then it found a home, and then the editor left and it lost its home. And then I just randomly sent it to someone who I was doing a different book, and I didn't hear and I didn't hear. And then they came back and said, we're all still laughing about this. And it was a picture book about a family reunion, but it sat in a drawer for 15 years because I thought, nobody wants this book. So if you don't try, it is always a no. If you try, it's a maybe. And sometimes you're going to get success when you don't expect it. So don't give up.
I'll say to two energies, right? To the readers, I'm going to say, we need to liberate our imaginations. As much as we feel that segregation and slavery is over, our imaginations are just starting to become liberated in terms of things that we can imagine, things that we can think of, things that we can dream. I know we talk about books being young adult books, but I look at them as introductory books to science fiction, because science fiction is new to all of us. And if I throw some high science fiction at you, you haven't read Hunger Games, you haven't read The Planet of Junior Brown. You don't know the basic stuff. So now that might turn you off. So I like to say, yeah, read some children's books, read some introductory stories. Don't be afraid to do it. It's, people ask me, are my books for kids? No, they're for they're for people, right? Who writes the kid stuff? Adults. So I enjoy it too. And then for the writers, I like to say right outside the box, but the reality is outside the box, there's no other box. And we need to challenge each other as writers. I feel like playing the dozens, how comedians go back and forth with each other. Well, you come up with an idea, that's going to inspire me to come up with another idea. I don't think in terms of best or worst. I think of inspiration begets another inspiration. So I like science fiction writers who try to write something different, because it's going to fuel my imagination to try to write something else that's different, and we're going to get so much variety. It's beautiful.
Did everybody get their chance?
I would just agree with ditto to what everyone else said, and also I would say it's helpful to find some type of like writing community, be it like a few people online you can bounce ideas off of. I know I found this little group in my city that's occasionally meets together and writes together at coffee shops. They call themselves the Indie Writing Coven. And just being able to go and like occasionally like connect with other people. I know writing is often seen as like something you do in a little basement corner by yourself, hunched over a computer. But like I definitely think there's value in that community aspect of writing when it comes to not only getting your stories written, but also like when you're trying to promote your work and like supporting each other. So yeah.
Okay. So I posted all the authors' contact information into the chat again. If you all want to check them out and go to their websites or follow them on social media, their newsletters, you should find all of their links on their websites. And once again, I know I keep saying it, but thank you for bearing with us for going a little over. I probably should have went ahead and said this was going to be 90 minutes long, because I didn't want to cut off anybody, and everybody had such wonderful and enlightening things to say and great stories to tell. Like, that's one thing. I've met most of you all individually at some point in some meeting, and you all have such great conversations. So I knew that we would have a good time today and that you all would vibe very well with each other. But let me give you this closing. So we're going to do a warm virtual hand clap by using reaction emojis to thank our authors. And then I want to thank you all for spending your afternoon with us. And authors, once again, thank you for sharing your amazing stories and insight and personalities with the audience. And then I have to give you the company line. If you love this virtual Black History Month program and are looking for more like it, especially if you're not local to the San Jose, California area, on Wednesday, February 18th from noon to 1 p.m. Pacific time, Alessandra Harris, who's with us today, will be back to speak on African Americans and the struggle for racial justice at the at San Jose State University Library. And you can register to virtually join this event via the SJSU Library website. And I can post that link if anybody's interested. And if you're local, you can please check out our San Jose Public Library website, sjpl.org, to see all of our upcoming programs to commemorate the 100th year celebrating Black history in the United States. Let me go ahead and post that link for registering for the next event. And then I want to thank you all for spending your afternoon with us again, and have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. And if you're watching the Super Bowl, please enjoy. If you live in San Jose, please stay out of that traffic. But thank you all for coming. Thank you, authors.